There's something unnatural and terrifying about submarines. Sailing on the open ocean is terrifying enough as it is, especially in centuries past when you were at the mercy of the winds. Now, you want to get in a boat that's made to sink and travel under the water? No, thank you. Hit the wrong button, open the wrong door or hatch, and you're gonna go down quick and not be able to get back up again. Like what happened in 1939 to the HMS Thetis during its dive trials when it was sunk after both doors on one of its torpedo tubes were open to the sea and the sub inevitably sank. So, what happened? I'm Andrew, and this is History's A Disaster. Tonight, we're diving into the waters of Liverpool Bay and exploring the sinking of the HMS Thetis during its dive trials in 1939. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Fantastic Chocolate, the chocolate of choice for scuba divers everywhere. During the 1930s, the British Royal Navy, fearing rising tensions with Nazi Germany, sought to replace their older submarines to counter the German U-boats that had become a major threat in World War I. So, they came up with the Triton T-class electrical diesel submarine by 1935 and commissioned 15 to be built to start replacing the older subclasses. One of the first of the new T-class to roll out of the Camel Yard shipyards in Birkenhead was the HMS Thetis. HMS Thetis was 275 feet long, with a beam of 26.5 feet, and weighed in at just over 1,100 tons while surfaced, and jumping up to almost 1,600 tons when it dives. Gotta fatten up to go under. Being a diesel-electric sub, it was powered by two 5,000 horsepower diesel engines, which powered the sub and charged the batteries when it was above water. But as soon as it dives down, the sub switches over to the two 2,900 horsepower electric engines for propulsion. Diesels require air to run, something that's in rather short supply under the water, necessitating the need for all electric. She was also armed with 6 internal torpedo tubes, 4 external torpedo tubes, and a 4-inch deck gun. Thetis was completed and launched on June 29, 1938. And as usual for this podcast anyways, she was fucked from the start. During a first set of sea trials in April 1939, someone put in a steering gear incorrectly, so that when Thetis was turned to starboard, she actually went to port, and vice versa. During her first dive, the bow planes which controlled the rate of descent became jammed in the hard dive position, and the trials had to be abandoned. 1 month later, her torpedo bay equipment was tested. After testing was complete, the torpedo room gear was given a good coating of enamel paint, specifically the test cock on tube number 5, which would come back to haunt the crew. But soon enough, Thetis would be ready for her next set of sea trials on June 1st. Thetis headed out along the north coast of Wales to Liverpool Bay under the command of Lieutenant Commander Guy Bolus, along with the tug Greebcock, to perform her first dive of the sea trials. On board were 5 officers, 48 crew, and 50 passengers, making the already cramped space even worse, since it was designed to run with a crew of 53, and most of these passengers were just along for the ride. 26 were technical advisors from Camel Yard, 5 other shipbuilders from different firms, 7 members of the Admiralty either curious about the new sub or who would eventually be given command of one, and 2 caterers there to keep them all supplied with sandwiches, beer, and pies for the reception after the sea trials were over, and a mercy pilot. By 1:30 in the afternoon, Thetis was 38 miles out from Liverpool and ready to begin her first dive. Every one of the guests was given one final chance to back out and hop on the escort tug, but no one took that option. They were all ready to go quite literally down with the ship. Since no one opted to back out, Commander Bolus made the radio call that they'd be diving for 3 hours. But Thetis was having a little problem. Commander Bolus couldn't get it to go down. Thetis was way too light. For nearly an hour, Thetis flopped about, circling around and blowing her tanks, just for one end of the sub to go under for a bit, before popping right back up and dropping the other end under the waves. Each time she would go just a little bit deeper, but to no avail, she just wouldn't go down. So they had to figure out why they were too light, so they ran a check on the water in different tanks aboard the sub. One of these checks was to see if the internal torpedo tubes were flooded. To check the tubes, Torpedo Officer Lieutenant Frederick Woods had to open the test cocks. If water came out, then the tube was flooded and you were all good to go. However, the test cock on tube number 5 had become blocked by enamel paint, which stopped any water in the tube from flowing out. Adding to this, a confusing layout on the bow cap indicators led Woods to believe the bow cap, which kept seawater from flooding into the tubes, was shut, when in fact, it was very much open. So since no water came out of the test cock, the inner torpedo tube door was opened. Hundreds of gallons of seawater rushed into the tube, forcing its way into the sub. The sudden additional weight and the bow planes being set for hard dive forced the nose of the sub to drop rapidly. Lieutenant Woods and another crew member tried to shut the torpedo room door, but this required screwing in 18 butterfly nuts. Plus, the latch on the door was broken, which caused some difficulty getting the door shut. This would lead to the first 2 compartments of the sub becoming completely flooded before they could get a bulkhead door open to block the water coming in any further. Thetis, now weighed down with tons of seawater in the bow, sank straight down 150 feet to the seabed. The nose of the sub slammed into the muddy bottom, bringing the sub to a sudden stop. They tried unsuccessfully to free the sub by running the engines full astern. They were stuck nose down 150 feet beneath the waves. On the surface, as the crew of the tug watched the sub struggle, a loud rush of air was heard and Thetis dropped quickly beneath the waves. Lieutenant Coulter, commander of the Greebcock, knew something bad had just happened. The original plan was Thetis was supposed to settle at periscope depth, then submerge and release smoke flares and indicator buoys, but none of that happened. Thetis just dropped out of sight beneath the waves. Coulter gave them some time, watching for any sign of the sub and thinking maybe she just surfaced elsewhere before deciding at 4:45 to send a message through to the submarine base at Gosport. But the short range of the ship-to-shore radio meant the message couldn't be sent directly and had to be relayed by the local telegraph office at Gosport Port. However, the boy who took messages from the harbor to the telegraph office on his bike managed to pop his tire and had to take an hour to get it fixed. It would be after 6 p.m. by the time the message about Thetis finally made it to base. While the crew of the tug waited, they decided, you know what? Let's not drop anchor. That sounds like a great idea. Not like they're gonna drift a few miles off from where Thetis went down or anything. And of course, they didn't drift just a few miles. They ended up around 4 miles from where they should have been. So when naval officers in Gosport became worried about having no direct contact with Thetis for over 3 hours and getting the message from the tug, they immediately ordered a search of the area. The Royal Navy destroyer HMS Brazen, which was nearby in the Irish Sea, was sent to help locate the Thetis. But since the Greebcock was way off course, they started the search 4 miles away from where they should have been. And while they searched the seas, the RAF sent out 4 planes to run a search of the area from the sky, looking for anything that might indicate the sub's location. While this search was being conducted 4 miles away, Commander Bolus was getting a little worried. Normally, Thetis would carry enough air to be submerged for around 36 hours. But with the extra 50 passengers on board, this time was cut in half. They had less than 20 hours of air, and the clock was ticking. They all tried to stay calm and pass the time talking about sports or what kind of reception they would get when they were finally rescued. As the air supply dwindled, they came up with a plan to help any would-be rescuers above. If they dumped most of the drinking water from the stern tanks, the stern of the Thetis should be buoyant enough to rise to the surface. And since they were only in 150 feet of water, and the Thetis was way longer than that, the stern should jut out of the water, making them easier to find and rescue, which was a great plan. The stern broke the surface of the water and was plainly visible. However, the only problem was the search was going on 4 miles away. As time passed, with no obvious signs of rescue coming, Bolas asked for volunteers to begin the dangerous and somewhat complicated task of escaping the ship through the aft escape hatch. A slow process that would only allow 2 men to escape every half hour. The crew had Davis escape gear, a very early version of an oxygen rebreather, but few of them had been fully trained in how to use it, and of course, most of the 50 passengers on board would have no clue on how to escape a sunken sub. Captain Harry Oram, a senior fleet officer, was the first to volunteer to attempt to escape. And I say attempt because the first person out was taking a huge risk. To get out through the escape hatch, he would have to flood it while inside to equalize the pressure before he could open the outer hatch. And with the sub tilted on such a steep angle, there was no guarantee that the outer hatch would even open properly, leading to the very real possibility he might drown in the airlock. On top of that, even if he got out, it was likely that there would only be an empty sea above to greet him, and he would most likely drown before being rescued. With surviving the escape not guaranteed, Captain Oram had messages taped to his clothes, outlining the situation on board and the necessity of getting fresh air into the ship if his body was found. Meaning, even in death, he could still help the remaining crew. Captain Oram and Torpedo Officer Lieutenant Woods went first, successfully making the 20-foot ascent to the surface. As night began to fall overhead, the 4 planes searching the seas from above spotted a gray shadow in the water and quickly found what they assumed was the sub's distress buoy. 8 of the Royal Navy's fastest destroyers left Portland and Dorset en route to the new possible location of Thetis. Following not long behind them was the salvage ship Vigilant coming out of Liverpool. The Brazen was notified and diverted to the new location. As they searched through the night, checking out each possible location, they kept coming up empty-handed. By 7 o'clock the next morning, the Brazen was finally at the correct location, and lookouts had finally caught sight of the stern of the Thetis, sticking up 18 feet out of the water and the 2 men floating nearby. They were quickly picked up, and the first real news of what was going on had reached the surface. More ships were soon on scene, swarming around the exposed stern. Thick steel cables were wrapped around the stern to hold it in place, and a diver was sent down to try and connect an air hose, but the inexperienced diver only had 30 minutes of air and failed to get the hose connected in time. Sailors waited around the stern in lifeboats, waiting for more to escape as the hours dragged on. Crews with cutting equipment stood ready and waiting for the order to cut through the 5/8-inch thick armor to free the men from the crippled sub, an order that would never come. Paperwork found years later would show the Admiralty intentionally held them back to preserve the hull integrity so the sub could see later use in the war they knew was coming. So basically they said, fuck the people on board, we can always get more sailors. What we really need is that sub more than we need them. On board the sub, conditions were deteriorating as the carbon dioxide built up and the oxygen had begun to run out. Desperately, Bolas ordered the men to try and escape 4 at a time through the escape hatch. That way they could at least get some of the men off the sub and make the remaining oxygen last just a little bit longer. However, one of the 4 panicked as the chamber was being filled. In his panic, he tore out his rebreather and jammed the outer hatch as he tried to open it too early. The crew inside then had to open the inner hatch and drag the 4 men back inside, but 3 of them had already drowned by the time they got the hatch open. The survivor claimed that the outer hatch was now jammed and any further escape was now impossible. But 2 of the men decided to try their luck anyways. They said, "Nothing's impossible, we can do this shit." And shipbuilder Frank Shaw and lead stoker Mac Arnold managed to get the jammed hatch open and made it to the surface where they were picked up by the waiting lifeboats. By now, oxygen levels are dropping and carbon dioxide levels are rising dangerously, leading to hypoxia and hypercapnia as carbon dioxide built up in their bloodstream. Many of the men still aboard the sub were either already passed out or dizzy and uncoordinated from the lack of oxygen. Their ability to perform even simple tasks was going out the non-existent window, as well as any hope of organizing any sort of escape. But they tried to use the escape hatch again, or at least something happened on board the sub. But whatever they tried went horribly wrong, since it ended in the Thetis becoming completely flooded. As tons of seawater filled the submarine, the steel cable snapped under the strain. With the loss of the steel wire holding it in place, the sub sank back down to the seabed just after midnight. On June 3rd, the news was given to nervous relatives waiting on shore. The official statement was there is no hope for the remaining men in the submarine. Within a month of the sinking, the Liverpool and Glasgow Salvage Association was brought in to salvage the sunken sub. After the operation, the bell from Thetis was presented to the association by the Admiralty, and it was placed in the Merseyside Maritime Museum, along with the plate from the No. 5 torpedo tube and the officer's wardroom clock. During the salvage operations, the sinking would claim one final victim as a diver died from the bends. On September 3rd, Thetis was intentionally grounded at Ainsley the same day that war was declared. It would take nearly 3 weeks for the grisly task of removing the dead from the sub. In the following autopsies, it would be revealed that most of the crew died from carbon dioxide poisoning prior to the ship being flooded, and the remainder of the crew died from drowning. They would be given naval funerals with full honors. The sub would go on to be repaired and see service as the HMS Thunderbolt under the command of Lieutenant Commander Cecil Crouch. Over the next 3 years, the sub would have a somewhat successful career, sinking enemy ships and disrupting shipping. Her career would come to an end on March 14, 1943, when an Italian corvette spotted her and launched depth charges. The stricken Thunderbolt was sunken over 1,300 feet in the Mediterranean Sea with the loss of all hands. The original sinking of Thetis would result in lawsuits that would drag out over the next several years. The Admiralty invoked Crown privilege, which essentially blocked a lot of evidence from being brought up, and the sinking would end up after several years and multiple appeals being ruled as a non-negligent accident, so no type of compensation was ever awarded. A tribunal was held that looked into all of the causes of the sinking. They published a report in April 1940 listing the 6 causes that they figured contributed to the sinking. The first cause was the rear torpedo tube door being opened when the other end was also open to the sea, allowing water to rush in. 2 was the failure caused by paint blocking the test cock, which led Woods to believe the tube was not flooded. 3rd, the crew failed to secure the first watertight door, due to the damaged latch and all those stupid butterfly nuts on the door. 4th, the crew failed to pump the water out of the flooded compartments, which would have been impossible to do unless they somehow managed to swim back in through the flooded compartments and close the torpedo tube bow door. Can't pump seawater out if it's just gonna keep coming back in. 5th, the rescue attempt was less than effective, mainly stemming from Greebcock's failure to anchor in place, leading the search to start some 4 miles away. And finally, the crew failed to save themselves. And obviously, this was the biggest one. If you can't save yourself, then why should anyone else, right? Doesn't matter that there were several other failures that would lead to this not being possible. They should have tried harder, damn it. And again, never mind that by this point, they would have been severely oxygen deprived and not thinking or acting right. The inquiry lasted 4 years, concluding with the publication of its findings in 1943. The recommendations made by the Tribunal of Inquiry into the loss of HMS Thetis were aimed at addressing the procedural failures and safety issues that contributed to the sinking, with the goal of preventing similar incidents happening in the future. Recommendations that ranged from enhanced training on emergency procedures and equipment, stricter safety protocols during sea trials, better radios to maintain contact with the surface while a sub is submerged, improved maintenance inspections, and the development of better emergency escape mechanisms, because obviously the system they had in place was wholly inadequate to the task. On November 7, 1947, a memorial to the crew of Thetis was unveiled at a cemetery in Holyhead, with a second one going up on the 75th anniversary after a ceremonial wreath laying at the Riverwalk in Birkenhead. And that was the sinking of the HMS Thetis. Thanks for listening, and if you liked the show, please consider leaving a rating or review on your app of choice. And you can reach out to the show at historiesofdisaster@gmail.com. Questions, comments, or suggestions. Well as follow the show on social media. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, a few others, whatever. And share the episode. Your friends will love it. And you know what? Instead of taking a ride on a submarine, get some scuba gear. Go for a dive. Maybe with some penguins. See under the sea from a different view, without a window or inches of metal between you, and the majesty of life under the sea. So, chase that dream. Live for today, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Thanks and goodbye.